He laughed at the American guard who warned him about the cold. Actually laughed, out loud, in front of everyone. It was November 1943. Camp Concordia, Kansas. And Unteroffizier Franz Weber, veteran of the North African Campaign, survivor of El Alamein, had just been told that going outside without proper winter gear was genuinely dangerous. He was from Bavaria. He knew cold. Except he didn't. Not this cold. Not Great Plains cold. Not the kind of cold that doesn't feel like anything at first, then takes everything from you before you realize what's happening. 4 hours later, Franz Weber was fighting for his life. And the guard who warned him was the one who saved it. Here's exactly what happened. By 1943, the United States was running one of the largest prisoner of war programs in history. Over 400,000 Axis prisoners eventually held on American soil. German Afrika Korps soldiers made up a huge portion of that number. These men had a specific problem. And it wasn't the camps. It was the geography. The Army had built POW facilities across the American interior. Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, North Dakota. Places chosen specifically because they were remote, far from coastlines, far from borders, far from anywhere a confused escapee could realistically reach. What the Army hadn't fully accounted for was the psychological mismatch. These German prisoners, most of them from Central Europe, many from the Mediterranean theater, had absolutely no frame of reference for the American Great Plains in winter. None. The Great Plains in January operates by different rules than anywhere in Western or Central Europe. The latitude is similar. The climate is not. Europe has the Atlantic Ocean moderating its temperatures. The Great Plains has nothing. No mountains to the north. No warm ocean to the west. Just flat open land stretching from Canada all the way down, with nothing to stop Arctic air from dropping straight through like a freight train. Camp Concordia sat in north-central Kansas, flat, open, exposed. The permanent staff at Concordia, American soldiers from the Midwest, many of them farm boys from Kansas and Nebraska, understood exactly what winter there meant. They'd grown up with it. They respected it the way you respect something that has killed people you knew. Sergeant Dale Hoffmeister had been stationed at Concordia since it opened in 1943. He was from Salina, Kansas, 40 miles south. He had seen plains winters his entire life. He had also, by November of that year, watched enough German prisoners underestimate the weather to develop a standard warning speech that he gave to new arrivals. It was a good speech. Specific. Clear. Based on real numbers. Most prisoners listened carefully. Franz Weber did not. Weber was 24 years old. He had enlisted at 18. He had fought across Libya and Egypt. He had endured temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the Sahara and temperatures well below freezing in the North African nights when the desert dropped fast after sundown. He was, by any reasonable measure, a physically hardened soldier with genuine experience operating in extreme environments. He was also, according to accounts from both American guards and fellow prisoners who knew him, extremely confident about that fact. When Sergeant Hoffmeister delivered the cold weather briefing to Weber's intake group in late October 1943, Weber reportedly leaned over to the prisoner next to him and said, in German, not realizing the translator was standing 3 feet away, "He talks about cold like we've never seen snow." The translator told Hoffmeister exactly what Weber said. Hoffmeister looked at Weber for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell him good luck." Nobody knew then how accurate that would turn out to be. The first weeks at Concordia passed without incident. October in Kansas is cold but manageable. Temperatures in the 40s and 50s. Some frost. Nothing that would alarm a man from Bavaria. Weber worked the detail assigned to his group, agricultural labor on a nearby farm operation. He worked outside daily. He wore the standard issue prisoner work clothing. He did fine. Then November arrived, and with November came the first genuine plains cold front of the season. What they didn't know, what Weber didn't know, is that a Great Plains cold front doesn't arrive gradually. It doesn't ease you in. A cold front in Kansas can drop the temperature 30 degrees in 2 hours. The wind picks up from the north, the sky goes white, and suddenly the air that was 38 degrees at noon is 8 degrees by 3 in the afternoon, with a wind that makes it feel like -15. On the morning of November 14, 1943, the temperature at Camp Concordia was 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but not extreme. Weber's work detail was scheduled for outdoor maintenance work around the camp perimeter. Hoffmeister made the rounds of the group before they headed out. He handed out additional cold weather gear, heavier gloves, wool-lined caps, extra layer jackets. Weber looked at the extra gear and handed it back. According to accounts from 2 prisoners in the group, he said, "I'm fine. This is nothing." Hoffmeister didn't argue. He had given the warning. He had offered the gear. He said, "Take it anyway. Put it in your pocket." Weber took the gloves. He shoved them in his coat pocket without putting them on. The work detail moved out at 8 a.m. By 9:30, the front had arrived. The temperature dropped from 22 degrees to -6 in 90 minutes. Wind out of the northwest at 28 miles per hour. Wind chill of -40 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not a survivable situation for a man without proper gear. -40 wind chill will cause frostbite on exposed skin in under 10 minutes. It will cause hypothermia in a healthy adult within 1 to 2 hours of sustained exposure. But that wasn't the worst part. Weber's group was working at the far end of the perimeter, nearly a mile from the main camp structures. When the temperature dropped, the group supervisor, a corporal named Edwin Marsh, immediately called the detail in. Everyone started moving back toward the buildings. Weber had been the furthest from the group, working alone on a fence section. When Marsh's call came, Weber turned to walk back and realized something that happens to people in extreme cold who aren't prepared for it. He couldn't feel his hands. Not numb. Gone. His fingers had lost function in the thin gloves he'd insisted on wearing. He couldn't grip anything. He tried to pull the extra gloves from his pocket, the ones Hoffmeister had told him to keep, and he couldn't manage the zipper. He started walking faster. Then he realized his feet were wrong too. The boots the Army had issued were adequate. But Weber hadn't laced them properly that morning. He'd been casual about it. Now, with the cold working through the gaps, his toes were going. At -40 wind chill, the body does something specific. It pulls blood away from the extremities to protect the core. Your hands go first. Then your feet. Then your face. Your brain, still warm, still working, starts making decisions that feel rational but aren't. Weber decided to stop walking and stand against the fence post to wait out what he thought was a temporary gust. It wasn't a gust. It was a front. It wasn't going to stop. He stood at that fence post for 11 minutes before Corporal Marsh noticed he wasn't with the group. Marsh turned around and couldn't see Weber through the blowing snow. He grabbed the nearest 2 guards and went back. They found Weber standing upright, arms tucked against his body, head down. He was conscious. He was shaking so hard his teeth were audible from 6 feet away. When Marsh reached him and grabbed his arm, Weber looked up. His face had gone a color that Marsh later described in his incident report as grayish-white on the cheeks and nose tip. That color meant frostbite was already setting in. Marsh got Weber moving immediately. Not carrying him, moving him. Getting him to generate whatever heat his body could still produce. The walk back to the main building took 12 minutes. It was the most important 12 minutes of Franz Weber's life. They got him inside. The medic on duty, Staff Sergeant Raymond Kowalski, took one look at Weber's hands and face and went straight to work. Here's what they discovered, and this is the part that most people don't know about frostbite treatment. You don't warm frostbitten tissue fast. You warm it slowly. Controlled. In 100 to 105 degree water, not hot. Because the tissue isn't just cold, it's damaged at the cellular level. Warming it too fast causes additional injury. The pain when circulation returns is described by survivors as among the worst pain a human being can experience. Weber made sounds during rewarming that, according to Kowalski's later account, he had never heard from a patient before. Not screaming. Something more controlled and somehow worse than screaming. It took 4 hours from the moment the front hit to the moment Kowalski told Weber he was going to keep all his fingers, all his toes, his nose. He had second-degree frostbite on 3 fingers of his right hand, first degree on both cheeks. His core temperature had dropped to 94.2 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees below normal, officially hypothermic. 2 more degrees, and the situation would have been irreversible. Sergeant Hoffmeister came to the medical bay that evening. He stood at Weber's bunk. Weber looked at him from under 3 blankets, hands wrapped, face marked with the characteristic red and white mottling of treated frostbite. Hoffmeister didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Still nothing?" According to Kowalski, who was present, Weber was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "Where can I get better boots?" Word of what happened to Weber spread through Camp Concordia within 24 hours. Not because the guards spread it. Because the prisoners did. Franz Weber was not an unpopular man. He was known as confident, sometimes brash, but generally respected by the men who served with him in North Africa. When a man like that nearly dies from weather, not from combat, not from escape, from standing outside on a Tuesday morning, it lands differently than a warning from an American sergeant. The cold weather gear uptake among prisoners at Concordia changed noticeably in the days that followed. Hoffmeister noted in his records that requests for additional cold weather equipment increased by roughly 80% in the 2 weeks after the incident. Men who had previously worn minimal gear started layering properly. Prisoners who had been casual about bootlacing, a seemingly small thing with enormous consequences in extreme cold, started checking each other's lacing before outdoor work details. What they discovered was that the Americans hadn't been exaggerating, not even slightly. The Great Plains in winter wasn't European winter. It wasn't North African cold. It was a different category of environment that operated by rules none of them had learned anywhere they'd ever been. Corporal Marsh became something of an informal cold weather instructor for the prisoner population. Not officially. Just through conversations at work details, answering questions, explaining what the signs looked like, when to come in, what the wind did. Several prisoners later described him as one of the most practically useful people they encountered during their captivity. It gets interesting here. Because Marsh, a farm boy from Hutchinson, Kansas, who had never planned on being in the Army, became genuinely interested in making sure the prisoners understood their environment. Not for any strategic reason. Because he had grown up watching animals and people get caught out in plains weather. He knew what it did. He didn't want to see it happen. The war was still going. These men were still enemies on paper. But cold doesn't check paperwork. Franz Weber spent 3 days in the medical bay. He recovered fully. No permanent loss of sensation. No lasting frostbite damage. A result that Kowalski attributed directly to how quickly Marsh had found him and moved him. Weber remained at Camp Concordia until the end of the war. He was repatriated to Germany in 1946. According to accounts gathered by a Kansas Historical Society researcher in the 1980s, Weber gave an interview late in his life in which he was asked about his time in America. He talked about Kansas, about the flatness of it, about the sky, which he said was unlike any sky in Europe, about the people he worked alongside on farm details, and about the cold. He said he had been a soldier for 6 years. He had been in the Sahara and in the mountains. He had thought he understood weather. He said Kansas taught him that confidence and knowledge are not the same thing. That's the real story here. Not just about weather, about the specific danger of expertise in one environment making you certain about another. Weber knew desert survival. Genuinely. That knowledge made him more dangerous to himself in Kansas, not less. because it gave him confidence he hadn't earned yet. Sergeant Hoffmeister knew something Weber didn't, and he tried to pass it on. The cost of not listening was nearly everything. Over 400,000 German prisoners spent time in America during World War II. Most of them made it home. Some didn't, not from violence, but from the sheer strangeness of a continent they had never encountered and couldn't fully imagine until they were standing in the middle of it. The Great Plains nearly killed a combat veteran in 4 hours on a Tuesday morning. Not because he was weak, because he was certain. That's the detail that should follow you out of this video. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been caught off guard by weather or an environment you thought you understood? I want to read those stories. And if you want more forgotten corners of the World War II home front, the strange, the unexpected, the genuinely hard to believe, subscribe. The next story involves a German prisoner who ended up staying in America permanently, for reasons nobody saw coming. Don't miss it.